Alright folks, it looks like it's about to get time to get started. Welcome to tonight's program, which is part of the broader Indiana County 1776 speaker series. If you like tonight's talk and topic, I encourage you to check out the Tourist Bureau's website. We've compiled, as part of the America 250 celebration, a whole host of topics regarding to Indiana County and the time when it was the frontier. So coming up next, we actually have colonial cooking. That should be fun. I hope there are samples. And birding in Indiana County in 1776. So if any of those, there's a full schedule of events they run through till the end of the year. I know we have Dr. Ford tonight, and he'll actually be back later this year to talk on another topic. And we have a couple of other items, speakers from the society that'll be doing so. So if you like tonight's talk, please tell your friends. But if they're out of the area too, we will be recording tonight's talk, so you can share that as well. We know we have folks outside of the area who are still very passionate about this particular topic. So tonight's topic is going to be an 18th century river town in Indiana County. By show of hands, how many of you are familiar with the town of Newport or have heard it in the past? All right, so this is, I'd say, we're split about 50-50, that's good. So Dr. Ford led a archaeological dig at the site, I believe, multiple, correct? And so, yeah. So Dr. Ford's going to talk to us about some of those findings and hopefully shed some light on one of the earliest towns in Indiana County. So Dr. Ford, you have the floor. The floor is yours.
Thank you all for being here tonight. Give me 1 second to get myself situated. So, what am I talking to you tonight is about Newport Village, and the site number for it is 36 IM 188. So it's a registered archaeological site with the state of Pennsylvania. And as the title says, it's a late 18th century and early 19th century village that's right along the Frankstown Road, where it hits the Conemaugh River. And the intent of the original settlers of this village was for it to be a transshipment point. That's why I refer to it as a river town, basically moving commodities that are coming east across the Allegheny Mountains from the Frankstown Road to the Conemaugh River and then sending them on down the river. It was hoped that it was also going to be the first county seat of Indiana County. None of that worked out for them. Right? The transshipment didn't work out, the county seat didn't work out, and frankly that's why it's an archaeological site that we're excavating right now rather than being where we're having this talk. If it had gone the way they had planned it, we'd be sitting there talking about some other place that didn't make it. So that's the gist of it. It's a little bit after the 1776 period, but it's very much in this sort of formative period for Indiana County and for Western Pennsylvania in general. So just to get everybody situated, the place is located about 2 miles northwest of Blairsville. It's the kind of red, pink or red blob there in the middle of the map. Blairsville is just kind of off to the bottom right there. If you want to get sort of kind of go find it, it's out on Newport Road. It's not hidden, and there's a game commission parking lot right there. That's usually the benchmark for folks, is people know those dug fields that are there. And that's kind of where it is. It is U.S. Army Corps of Engineers owned property. It's part of the flood pool for the Conemaugh Dam, and then the Corps leases it to Game Commission, and then the Game Commission either leases it out to farmers or more recently has planted it for dove cover. Because it's owned by the Corps of Engineers, so a federal agency, and managed by a state agency, the Game Commission, it is subject to the Pennsylvania History Code and the U.S. Archaeological Resource Protection Act. And the reason for this is that archaeological sites are part of our shared heritage. And so these are on government property, they're managed by the state government, and so they're part of they're a shared resource. The government is supposed to protect them for all of us. That hasn't actually been the case with this site. We got involved in this site in 2019 because it was being metal detected pretty heavily. And so Suzanne Haney, who's an archaeologist at the local DOT office up there by Eaton Park, turned us on to the site because she was worried about it. It was being kind of picked away at by metal detectorists. And to be clear, metal detecting on this property is in violation of the PA History Code and of the U.S. Archaeological Resource Protection Act. But as you guys all kind of know, there's a law and then there's enforcing the law, and if no one's enforcing the law, then why are we, how effective that law really is. And so Game Commission, who polices it, they don't really enforce that law. If you go out there and shoot dove out of season, they'll come for you. But if you're out there doing other stuff, they don't really care. So it was being damaged, and so that's when we got involved. So our first real research question for this place was, does it have the integrity of a site? When we sum up integrity of a site, is it intact enough that we can gain information from it? So that was our first real question, and the short answer is yeah, it does. There's actually quite a bit out there, and I'll kind of highlight that here in a couple of minutes. This research also ties into sort of some bigger research questions that I have, kind of looking at Western Pennsylvania. We've worked for years at Hannistown, which is just south down by Greensburg. It dates to about 1768 to about 1810. Newport is a generation later. So Newport is about 1790 to about 1840. So they overlap in time, but Newport's a little bit later. And Hannistown was the first British county seat west of the Allegheny Mountains. And Newport is, I'll talk a little bit about this, the first Anglo-American settlement in Indiana County. So they're tied in this sort of colonialist firsts kind of thing. But also importantly, both of them are very much tied to roads. And the shifting of those roads is what does them in. And so they're part of this sort of early transportation history, this early sort of kind of infrastructure history of Western Pennsylvania. And they also kind of nicely bookend the sort of frontier, sort of white frontier period in Western Pennsylvania. Hannistown being kind of on the bleeding edge of it, and Newport being on the backside of it. And so comparing them is kind of an interesting thing from my perspective. And actually, as Jonathan mentioned, if you come back on October 16th, I will talk at excruciating length about that. And so that's kind of the gist of what we'll talk about then, is comparing these places, and a third site that brings an African-American component into it as well. But what I'd like to do now is just give you a little bit of history for Newport, though the number of hands that went up, some of this will be kind of a rehashing for you guys. So I'll talk just a little bit of context, kind of what is Newport, why does it matter, what do we know about it, and then we'll talk about the archaeology and what the archaeology is going to try and add to that story that we have from the historical documents. So it starts with Frankstown Road. So on the 29th of March in 1781, Pennsylvania legislature ordered that there be a road opened from Frankstown branch of the Juniata River to the navigable portion of the Conemaugh River. And that same act also made the Conemaugh River a public highway and said that you couldn't block it, basically. You couldn't put dams on it or otherwise obstruct it. So they started cutting this road from Frankstown, heading west. They get to where the Black Lick Creek hits the Conemaugh River, which is just east of where we started to call Newport, in January of 1791, right? So they announced this in 1787. 2.5 years later, they get to right where Newport is. The idea here of this road was to join the Susquehanna River and the Ohio River together. And essentially, hop over about 20-30 miles over the Chestnut Ridge and the Laurel Highlands, and connect these two massive river systems, right? Because the Susquehanna, the Juniata flows into the Susquehanna, and that gets you down into the Chesapeake Bay, and the Conemaugh goes over and flows into the Kiscomenigus River, and then into the Allegheny, past Pittsburgh, into the Ohio, into the Mississippi, and down into the Gulf of Mexico, right? So you essentially have this massive river system on both sides, and you could connect those two things. Now you can connect trade across Pennsylvania, but also across much of the eastern half of North America. So that's their vision with this, is to bind these things together. The first iteration of the Frankstown Road ended right near the Black Lick, because they believed at that time that was the all-season navigable portion of the Conemaugh, right? That basically, if you got to where the Black Lick dumps its water in to the Conemaugh, that's where you can float a boat any time of year, year-round. And so Newport then is founded at that location sometime between 1787 and 1790. We're not 100% sure on the exact dates, but they basically put it in with the prospect of this road coming into this point. And when they lay this out, it's actually a pretty good sized town. It's got five streets. One is called Water Street. One is called Ford Street, which is not for me, but for the crossing there. They later rename it Ferry Street because they did a ferry. There's a Cedar Street. There's Frankstown, which is probably also called Main Street, and then oddly Appleby Street. I don't have any idea. And those actually form up around a little square that they call the Diamond, so kind of like going down to Ligonier, basically. And there's a couple of other small streets. There's a Strawberry Lane and Adams Lane that pop up in some of the land transactions. So they lay out this pretty good sized town, and it becomes the first permanent European settlement in what would become Indiana County. This sounds kind of impressive, but basically it was there, and then they formed Indiana County, right? So that's why it gets to claim that. Germane to what we're doing right now with the 250th, this is also where Indiana County had its first recorded 4th of July celebration in 1801, and there's some fanfare at this town celebrating that relatively recent event for them within memory. And so it's a kind of a going concern. One of the things that pulled them in was that there is this sort of what they describe as a natural stone wharf at a low spot in the Conemaugh banks. If you go to the Conemaugh there right now, it's pretty steep sided, there's a lot of cliffs there, but there is kind of a low spot. And right near there is this sort of bedrock shelf that stuck out into the river that would have been probably a convenient place to tie up a flatboat. And so they had this sort of coming together of these different kind of geologic aspects to make it attractive to them. By the way, these photos are from the Historical and Geological Society of Indiana County's collections. A lot of what I'm talking about here comes out of their collections. There's all kinds of good stuff right behind that wall. And so it's a great place to do research. But between that kind of like dip in the cliffs along the Conemaugh, with this natural stone landing, and the fact that the Black Lick is now adding its water to the depths of the Conemaugh, again, they thought this was the good spot to end the Frankstown Road, and again, the Newport was going to be this transshipment location, this river town, that where you could basically, people would prosper from facilitating this transshipment of goods from wagons to boats as they come across the Frankstown Road to the Conemaugh. There's iron coming out of the Juniata district, so early iron in Pennsylvania is right where the Frankstown Road is kind of starting. So moving that iron west towards baby Pittsburgh, basically. There's other things like salt and other regional products within Indiana County that could drain down to this location and be shipped out. And so they began to build with that kind of in mind. There's reports of them even building like a chute that would have let them load stuff down the riverbank. And I'll come back to that, because that seems like one of these crazy 19th century claims that you see that doesn't really show up in reality, but it may actually have been a real thing. Here's the problem. Turns out that the Conemaugh is not dependable at this location. This is not the all-weather port, basically, that during high water it's great. During low water you can basically walk across in the 19th century. This is, by the way, going to be a little bit different than today. The Conemaugh has got the dam on it now. This structure is underwater somewhere. You don't see it anymore, and the Conemaugh is at a different level than it was historically, and is much more controlled now with the dam on it. But basically, they realize this is not the spot to be. The spot to be is actually down by Salzburg. You got to have a little Hannah Creek come in and add water, and that's where you get to where you can actually float a flatboat year-round. And so to fix this deficiency, the Frankstown Road just marches on, right? They realize this real quick. They get to Newport in 1790. By 1791, the road has continued on and has actually reached Pittsburgh, right? So this doesn't take them long to realize the mistake. And you get this nice overland route all the way to Pittsburgh. With that, they actually then reroute the Frankstown Road away from Newport. Maps like the one you see on here from 1820 show the Frankstown Road crossing the Conemaugh east of the Black Lick Creek, which makes a lot of sense, right? Because why would you cross the Black Lick to then cross the Conemaugh when you could just cross the Conemaugh, right? So there's some logic to this. And so the road is rerouted. the town actually does better than you would think it would do from having this very brief moment like this. There's I think because it had built up with some infrastructure and because there wasn't a whole lot of other competition, right? For the early years, it's the only really formal Anglo-American settlement in this little corner of the world. And so it prospers into about the 1820s. So it actually does all right. You got immigrants, I think, coming towards Ohio. You've got that, again, they still got that stone wharf, so when the water is good, you can load there. If people can make a choice, right, do you continue along by road or do you hop on a boat here? It is like a convenient place for local folks to come in and do their business. And so I think it has enough going for it that it actually holds on for about 20 years after it's realized that it's not going to have its original purpose. And it's a going concern, right? At various times, it's got 2 different taverns, it's got 2 different stores, it has a tannery, a scythe factory, a hatter shop, a carding machine, a sawmill, some blacksmith shops, a hotel, it has a U.S. post office for about 8 years. These are all kind of claimed by Newport. I would argue probably that the sawmill, the tannery, and some of the other businesses are in sort of like greater Newport, so sort of down probably on the Black Lake, sort of in the vicinity of, and you're coming up to town on a regular basis rather than in the core of the town, because nobody wants a tannery in the core. No, they smell bad. There's also a reportable blockhouse in the 1790s. The need for that diminishes pretty rapidly after the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794, as the indigenous population is pushed farther and farther west. And you get people really investing in this spot. There's a guy by the name of Joseph Barnes who starts a ferry at Newport in 1799. He also operates a mill over on Stony Creek on the Westmoreland side of the Conemaugh. He's building flatboats for those years when you can actually float a boat. He's transporting salt and iron to Pittsburgh, and so he's got a going concern. We're not quite sure where his ferry was. It's probably to the east of Newport, so closer to the Black Lake, mostly because that he could run a ferry anywhere he wanted within a half mile on either side of Newport, but we know that the Frankstown Road is running farther to the east, closer to Blairsville, and so chances are that's where his ferry was usually running. But there's a little bit of records from his ferry, and it gives us a sense of just how busy the Frankstown Road was. In the transportation season, he reports 20 to 40 teams of horses and cows crossing each day on his ferry, right? So there's a fair amount of traffic going on. And he likes it enough that in 1816 he actually moves to Newport proper and takes over operating the Conemaugh Inn, which is one of the taverns in the town. Again, they get a post office in 1810. By 1816, there's 30 families living in Newport. So again, it's not a booming metropolis, but it is definitely a going concern. 1816 though is probably the peak for Newport. The post office is closed in 1818, and that is not a good sign in terms of the life cycle of this town. There was a brief hope in the early 19th century by the residents that this was going to be the county seat when Indiana County is carved off from Westmoreland County, but when Indiana County is formed in 1803 and the maps are drawn, it's pretty obvious this is not going to be the case, because Newport is basically Westmoreland County, right? It is like you can throw a rock to Westmoreland County if you had a good arm across the river, and so it's not centrally located at a time when being centrally located would be pretty important for a county seat, and so that dream kind of evaporates. By 1820, the rerouted Frankstown Road is rerouted again, and it goes through Blairsville. Blairsville is settled in 1818, incorporated in 1825. The road goes through there, and it becomes basically the Huntington-Cambria, Indiana Turnpike, also known as the Northern Turnpike. And then basically, eventually that becomes the William Penn Highway, and then eventually that becomes US Route 22. Right? And so, but long story short, the road keeps getting farther and farther away, and pulling things more and more towards Blairsville. What's kind of interesting to me, at least, is that 1820s are also about the time we start to see Newport on maps. So it shows up on this map, it shows up on an 1818 map. Actually that one over there, I think is 1818, the Mellish Whiteside map. That it shows up on there. So it's actually on its way out before it gets mapped in a real way by the folks back east. And actually that's the kind of thing I'm going to talk a little bit about in October, is that sort of how fast change happens out this way in the first couple decades of the 19th century, that basically the cartographers can't keep up with the rate of change out here. By 1834, the Pennsylvania Canal has been extended on the other side of the river from Newport, going to Blairsville. That's not good for Newport. And then, you get the Pennsylvania Railroad hitting Blairsville in 1850, and then making its way onto Pittsburgh by 1852. All of this is pulling commerce and people and attention away from Newport, right? And so Newport is just getting smaller and smaller, less and less of a place to be. There's a report in 1880 of basically there being a single chimney left at Newport, right? So sometime before that, everybody moves on. Okay? So to kind of pivot a little bit towards some of the archaeology, there is no known contemporary plans of Newport. If you have one, please share it. That would make my life so much easier. It would be a lot less sweating. But there is this 1940s map that was drawn by George Hill and Elsie Hart. And this is done at least 50 years after the last building at the site has disappeared. But it appears that these guys, who I'm guessing are older when they do this, are doing it based on memory, probably some oral history, and probably at that point some visible extant features in the ground, right? You can see some holes where buildings were and that kind of stuff. But they draw this map out, and actually it's a nice map. It has enough features on it that we can actually tie it to a modern map, and so we've sort of rubber sheeted it. We call it georeferencing. We've stretched it so it fits onto the modern landscape, and use it as a little bit of a guide, right? Because it shows these 5 dwelling houses, these 5 homes. It's got a hotel and a store on it. It has this thing they call the nail factory, which I'm still trying to figure out. It has a stone wharf on there. It does show sort of 2 historic roads. It also has what it describes as the 20th century public road, which is modern Newport Road, so Route 3009, all kind of laid out there. There were probably more than 5 houses. If we had 30 people, 30 families, there's probably more than 5 houses. And the nail factory is a bit of an anomaly. All I can figure is it's either a blacksmith shop where he was making nails, or maybe like a steam-driven press where they're cutting nails. But it's kind of up on top of a hill. There's no water power. It's an interesting thing to point out if you're on a map like this. The other thing I'll draw your attention to real quick is you see that kind of scar on there just south of the road that goes down to the water. It's kind of a light spot. There's no trees in it. There's a big yellow patch in the middle of it. That's a big old gas pipeline. So in the 80s, they put a gas pipeline right through the middle of this thing. And it definitely took out some stuff when it went through. And it's still there. This is the one that they did in the 80s, and they redid it about 3 or 4 years ago. They dug it all up and put it back in again. And so there's a pretty good sized chunk of town that has just been wiped clean from the slate of history, basically, by this development in the 80s. So with that, let me talk a little bit about the archaeology. So we've been doing archaeology there since 2019. We've done, 3 30-day field schools. We train students in 30-day increments of this kind of stuff. So we were there in 2019. We were there in 2021, which was wild because that was still we were social distancing in the van to get down there. Everybody's wearing masks outside. It was a different world at that point. And then we were there in 23, and then we're actually there right now. The 4th one is going on right now. We're about halfway through this season. Just to quickly kind of summarize what we've tried to do. In 2019, we dug 60 what we call shovel test pits, and these are a 50 centimeter on a side hole. They're a square, roughly 9 inches hole that we use this to find stuff. So we go out and we dig a bunch of them, we dig them quick, we dig them with shovels, and that is to try and see, is there anything here? Based on that, then we will often go back and dig larger things. We call them excavation units. They're usually 1 meter by 1 meter. We dig them slower. That's the kind of stuff you see on TV with the troweling and the whatnot. And so in 2019, we did 60 test pits, and then we did 9 of these excavation units. Everything that year was on the wooded side of the sort of west side of the road, between the modern road and the river. The reason for that was that we had some issues with Game Commission getting our permit in time, and by the time that had happened, the farmer who had been using these fields had started to fertilize and plant, and he had a couple $1,000s into the fields, and we didn't want to mess up his livelihood, so we kept ourselves kind of over on the wooded side of things. But that's when we did find in one of these test pits, we found the store/post office, and I'll come back to that in 1 second. In 2021, we did 80 test pits and 22 excavation units. We had 30 students that year. It was just wild. It was just kids everywhere digging holes. It was great. And so we got a lot done that year. We found a bunch of stuff. We also did ground penetrating radar that year. And ground penetrating radar is essentially, it looks like a big lawnmower, and you push it back and forth, and it sends an electromagnetic signal into the ground that then bounces back. And based on how it comes back to the machine, you can get some sense, are there buried features there? So is there a foundation there? Are there graves there? It's really useful finding unmarked burial grounds. You can find Native American sites, you can see hearth and that kind of stuff. And so my colleague, Bill Chadwick, does this kind of work, and so we ran that out there as well, looking for features. And then in 23, we mostly went south of the gas pipeline to see if we could find anything down to the southern side. We did 90 test pits and 14 excavation units. We also did a little bit of work up in this area up here, kind of again back in this field where there's the hotel and the so-called nail factory are up there. And then this year we are about halfway through, and we've done about 80 test pits and about 11 excavation units. This year we did our test pits mostly in these areas out here and up here, kind of farther away from the modern road, east of the historic road, and we're also digging some in that main field. And what we're trying to do is to kind of see the extents. Yeah.
In the left picture there, sort of the red dots and the white dots, are those your test pits, or what are those?
Yeah, those are test pits. Okay. Yeah, the test pits, we always dig them on a grid, so just because it gives us some sense that we've sampled the whole thing. Right. So yeah, that's just showing it. That's just south of the pipeline, kind of in one of the fields where there should have been some houses, we didn't find them, as well as down into the woods there as well.
So on the earlier pictures, they were showing as red dots, and now they're showing both as red and white dots.
I'm not super consistent.
I mean, they're the same pits?
They're the same, well, they're
different years?
Yeah, different years. And
okay.
the white things on there are the numbers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's hard to see, but that's the labels for them. Which one's
gotcha.
which. Yeah. So kind of that's what we're up to, and we're out there right now. So this is pictures from yesterday. Pax doesn't have anything to do this week, so he's hanging out with me. And the students are out there working. If you're super interested in this stuff, we won't be there tomorrow because of the weather. We're going to go do a lab day, but we're out there Monday through Saturday for the next 2 weeks. We won't be there the 20th either because of Juneteenth. But feel free to stop on by and check it out. We're happy to give you a tour, let you see what we're up to. So that's the methods part. Let me talk about the more interesting stuff. We're kind of starting to find. Because what we're able to kind of do with this is begin to put some of the village of Newport back together, put it back on the landscape, begin to talk a little bit about what life was like there, those kind of things. And so, again, I've talked a little bit about, that there's this low spot where you can access the water, and that is also where the gas pipeline comes across. That I think it was convenient for them as well, basically. But there's that natural stone wharf, there's the blacklit coming in. There's also quite a few springs along this hillside, right? So there's fresh water, so you don't have to dig wells, you can just get water from a spring. And we also began to kind of find where these roads are, right? So you've got the historic road that actually kind of arcs through it. If you go out there today, there's a big weird curving tree line, which is in fact the historic road that cuts up through town. So that curving road on the map on the left lines up with the curving tree line on the map on the right, but we kind of got the road highlighted in gray there. The reason it's a tree line is that the thing is covered with rocks. It's cobbled. So they actually built a cobbled road, and it's got a camber to it, so it would drain off to the side. So it's a proper road. It'd be bumpy. I would not want to ride on it personally, but it would be solid. It would not be muddy. It'd be well drained, and that kept anybody from plowing it too, because it's just full of rocks. Right? And so they built this proper road that would have been part of the transportation network. Probably as it developed and the roads kind of began to push farther and farther west away from this town is probably when this really got developed. There's also the road that drops down the hill, and that's got a how to put it. That one was not actually cobbled, but we were able to look at it and we cut across it and we're able to use what's called a penetrometer. It basically measures compaction, and there is a very solidly compacted layer there. Right? So we feel pretty good that we got the one road that kind of has the curve to it, which may have actually historically been two roads. We might be looking at an intersection there somewhere. And then we got this road that would have dropped down the hill, and we're getting to be able to kind of snap some things onto the map. We also have what is quite possibly my favorite feature. Right down here, this little gray triangle is a spot on the hill where we were looking, I couldn't figure out what it was, because it's a little like triangle of stones that are retaining sort of a flatter area, and almost it almost raises up the hillside. When we dug into it, it was nasty. It was like just full of gravel and just hard stuff. And when I started messing around with the maps, it follows exactly where the turn for the road going down the hill is, right? So that road comes down the hill, you can see it there, heading right for the water, and then it bangs to the right to go to the stone wharf. And this is this is the least steep place out there, but it's still pretty steep. And so I had this vision of like the first 6 horse carts just going whoop, into the river, right? Because you're coming down this hill, the brakes don't work, the horse can't stop, and you're just over the edge, and it's about a 5-foot drop. Nobody dies, but it's really inconvenient and kind of embarrassing. And so I do that a couple of times, and then I think they basically banked the turn. They basically raised up the ground surface, so as you're coming down and make that turn, your typical force ride is pushing you in, just like a banked turn on a highway exit, to keep the carts on the road and not in the river, basically. And I just I enjoy that sort of you can see them kind of engineering this thing as they go. There's other weird stuff out there. There is that blue schmear that goes down there, is what I just describe as the rock-covered berm. And that's exactly what it is. There is a unnatural berm. Like you're walking along and it just pops up out of the woods in front of you. At the center, it's about 6 feet high, about 2 meters high at the center. At the ends, it is kind of pretty close to ground surface. And so what it appears is that they essentially created a uniform slope on a single plane for themselves, because the hill is also sloping this way and towards the water. So the hill slopes on 2 planes, and it's not uniform. It's got kind of a dish to it. And so this thing basically forms a single plane on a uniform slope, and they made it out of dirt and they covered it with rocks. I don't know what it is. All I can guess is it's that chute that shows up in one historical account. They sort of mentioned, oh yeah, there's a chute for loading stuff onto boats, which is the kind of thing that sometimes comes down through oral history and we can't make sense out of it. This might be that. It points right at where that stone wharf is on the map, right? And so maybe that's what they were doing, is a way to sort of shortcut and use gravity to load boats. They built this berm, and it would not have been easy. It's a lot of dirt with a lot of rocks on top of it. That image on the top left is we cut into it, and you basically have a little dirt on top that's accumulated from the trees over the last 100+ years, and then you have this whole covering of rocks. And you get through that, and you're into basically soil underneath. So they cap the whole thing with dirt. So, there's those kind of things that we're getting a handle on. We're also getting a handle on the limits of the town. The archaeological testing goes north of where the road crosses over the modern road, so it's sort of the top of that big image, and things peter out. There's really nothing up there. We dug a bunch of holes up there and found really nothing. Similarly, where we dug this year, north of the historic road, kind of up in here, there's nothing, like remarkably nothing. And similarly, we dug over here this year and got nothing. And a little bit, kind of surprisingly nothing, because there's a lot of stuff in that field in the middle that I'm going to talk about here in a second. But like the other side of this historic road is like clean, like real clean. And so presumably they're using it as farm fields, but to have it be that close to town is kind of an interesting thing. South of town, again, the pipeline goes through and takes out a big chunk. South of that, though, we do have some material culture, not nearly as much, right? So it seems like the core of the town is kind of up here, north of the pipeline, in the area that we're working, and we're not finding as much as we go farther and farther south. There is some stuff down south that looks like a part of a road and a retaining wall, so there is some infrastructure down there, but not the density of people living that we thought we might find. So again, we did some ground penetrating radar in this. We do it everywhere we go just to kind of check it out, to train the students on it as well, so they get the experience with it, so they get some different methods. But in this case, it really helped us identify some things. So it's a little bit of a Rorschach test kind of thing when you look at this stuff, but I think you can kind of make out those bright areas. Those are areas where the GPR was really sitting, like it was hitting something hard and sending back a really good signal. And so with that and the test pits, we started to do some excavations, both in this field and across the way. And some of the stuff we found was, I think, this store post office. So this is over on the wooded side, it's kind of between the road and the river. And there's a pretty good sized foundation. It's about 24 feet by about 17 and a half feet. I think that might only be half of it actually. That is down there in the woods on kind of an area where it looks like, again, they did some flattening. It's an abnormally flat spot for this little hillside. And it lines up with this hill map for where the store / post office was. So that's what we think we might have gotten into. Real quick, so technology is really awesome. So the images on here, except for the map, are what we call photogrammetry. And what photogrammetry is even someone who's not as bright as me, like I'm not that bright, can take pictures, and you take a bunch of pictures, and then some really smart people make some software that takes those pictures and makes a three-dimensional image out of it. So what we have is this image and this image are actually the same image, just rotated differently, so that we can, so it allows us to go out in the field and to capture things with photos and then make a three-dimensional model of it. So we have a permanent record that we can take back with us, and even if we backfill these, we fill them back in, we can always go back and look at it. So that's here, and there's a smaller one in the top left, right? Because this is pretty good size. This is that's 24 feet across it, and with trees all around. So my ability to take a picture of the whole thing is pretty limited. But if I take like 300 pictures of it and put them together, I get a three-dimensional model of it. So that's what we're looking at there. Just it's a little bit hard to make sense out of. This is what there's a wall here that runs across. You can see it popping out here. It shows up right there. There's a nice corner right here that kind of heads back that way. That's sitting right there. There's two big flat stones come together, and then there's a wall right here as well, which is the first thing we actually found. And then there's up here. There's a little bit of wall there as well. And so we dug these holes to be able to kind of find the edges of this thing. And it's a stone foundation for sure. It's made out of pretty good size, like rounded rocks. I call them man-sized rocks because basically one person can pick them up, but it gets old after a while. So they're kind of a person-sized rock that you can pick up. And then they stuck little rocks underneath them to kind of chink them and level them out, basically. So it's not a real fancy wall, but it's a very substantial set of walls. And we tested all around it, so we got a pretty good idea of kind of how big it is. And they filled it back with stones. When they were done, when they got rid of the place, they just pushed rocks into it. So digging it's not a lot of fun. But it's full of artifacts, and there's a lot of artifacts just outside of it, which is one of the reasons we think it might be this store/post office building, because it's got a pretty remarkable diversity of artifacts all in one spot. There's redware up there in the top left corner. Some of that may have been made within 30 to 60 miles of this place. Probably some of it might even be closer. It's probably locally produced ceramic. A couple of those pieces may have come out of Philadelphia. The stuff at the bottom is mostly creamware and a little bit of pearlware, which is manufactured between 1760 and about 1810, and it's all nicely hand painted. None of that is coming local. That is all coming out of England. So that stuff basically was produced in England, came across an ocean, got loaded onto an ox cart, something came over the mountains, and then somebody's kid knocked it off a table. It gives you perspective on your own anger sometimes. So that a lot of that though is coming out in all different patterns. And then similarly up top is a little bit. There's two pieces of porcelain up there that again are probably coming out of England and coming across, and a glass bottle finish, bottle lid. All of this is coming out of this right around this big foundation. And what's kind of cool is we're actually starting to see across the road some similar decorations, right? So probably stuff that's coming through the store and being sold is ending up in less dense, but out in the rest of the town. It's kind of a nice connection that we're seeing. Over in what is today a field on the east side of the road, we also encountered a pretty good sized foundation. It's about 17 feet by about 14 feet, so it's not huge, but it's bigger than the sort of 16 by 16 that we often see for houses in this period. And it's really nicely made. This is actually, it's dry laid stone, but the stones have been dressed. So somebody took the time to knock off the round bits so they fit together better. And so you can sort of see that here.
This is again one of these photogrammetry models, but you can see that here's a hole. This is a wall, and then it's coming this way as well, right? So we've got this sort of kind of corner on it here.
It actually has a builder's trench, so they actually dug down and laid this as a proper foundation. And so it's got it's a much nicer sort of foundation. It's right where the hill map says there's a quote unquote hotel. Maybe it's a hotel, maybe it's a tavern, maybe it's just a big house, but it's the nicest thing we've seen out there, basically. In excavating it is also full of rocks, like really inconveniently full of rocks. It's like 75 to 80% rocks, like 20% artifacts, and like 5% dirt. Like it's artifacts and rocks all the way down. And inside of it, there's actually between the rocks there are a lot of voids, so places where there's no dirt, and there's a lot of those little tiny land snail shells, so which suggests that this thing was probably filled full of rocks and then allowed to sit, because those little guys don't burrow, they don't like being underground, and so they got in between the rocks, and then somebody piled dirt on top of them, and so it gives us some sense of how this place may have been demolished. Very near there, we get some cool artifacts. We get a mouth harp on the left, so one of those like kind of twangy, annoying instruments that they played in the 19th and 18th centuries. And then this it's not actually a coin, it's a 1793 guinea token. So it's a copper version of a gold coin. So it doesn't have the monetary value, but it was probably used as either as a counter, or it could have been exchanged as like a mark, like so it has monetary value if someone recognizes it, but it doesn't have the gold value that an actual guinea would have. But it gave us a date of 1793, which is kind of cool. So we got that kind of stuff happening right around there. We did spend much of the 23 season digging into this foundation, trying to get a better sense of it, trying to get to the bottom of it to see how deep it is, how big it is, that kind of stuff. We put a 5-meter long trench across it that got really out of hand. Those are two students trying to record it, so one of them, you can sort of see both sides. It's a 5-foot deep hole full of rocks. We got 5 feet down, and then I I was born in '78. My dad used to have me ride on the back of like plywood in the back of a pickup truck on the highway. So like my sense of safety is not super well developed. But even this, I was like, I'm gonna have a hard time explaining to the magistrate like how that student died and why I thought this was a good idea. So we, at 5 feet, we called it and got out because it was getting a little scary. We did not get to the bottom of it. There is a very, very close down Newport Road. If you don't know it's there, you would never look for it. There's a log building. It's not the log building that's really easy to see. It's hidden in the back and it's covered with asphalt shingles. But there's a log building that's probably of a similar vintage to these things, probably like early to mid 1800s, that has a very similar stone foundation under it. That's built the same way, sort of big rocks with little rocks stuck in, that kind of stuff. That has about a 6 foot below the floor. So like I can get in there and crouch and be underneath the floor joist. And so we were probably getting close, but we didn't make it, and it was a lot of work, and we're not going to try it again, basically. It was valiant, but we didn't get there. But we did find a lot of information about kind of the artifacts from the town. And then things get a little bit less clear down in the southern part of that field where that so-called nail factory is. There's at least 3 possible foundations. They're discrete things, and there's no disturbance in between them, so they're not connected. So there's 3 different things down there. One of them, we just call anomaly B, is not very big. It's about 10.5 or so feet by 6 feet, and about 3 feet deep. And it is also full of stone, like just kind of like the other one, just mostly rocks and then artifacts. And we dug a unit into that and didn't really get a lot of clarity on what it is. So this year we've actually got a couple of units next to it so we can catch a wall of it from the outside and see how it was built and try to get a better sense of how it was constructed, its shape. It's still full of artifacts. I mean, it's producing huge amounts of glass. It's got, 4 buttons that come out of it already. Some kind of coin that we can't decipher because it's been rubbed too much. A lot of animal bone coming out of it. A lot of ceramics. So I mean, people were putting stuff in it as they were filling it in. And then next to it, this thing called anomaly D is a little less clear. It's got it may in fact just be a pile of rocks. Honestly, we're digging that again, trying to figure that out as well. But essentially, this is what we're trying to dig around these things to get a better sense of how they were built and try to understand how they fit in, right? Because a lot of times we start on these things and we don't know until we get into them what we're going to find. And some of them I gotta say I don't know because humans definitely do it. I can put a date on it with the artifacts, but we got to figure out what they were for, and that's what we're up to this season with those. So by way of conclusion here, let me just kind of a couple of patterns. One obvious thing is just the amount and the size of rocks that they drug up the hill for this site. The rocks that we're seeing in the foundations are different than the bedrock. They're not the same. The bedrock's kind of plated like sedimentary stones. These are all kind of rounded river rocks. So presumably they're going down to the Conemaugh or the Black Lake and hauling, again, these not insubstantial rocks up the hillside. I get winded walking up the hillside, so I don't even imagine like trying to bring rocks up here. And then they're basically building these substantial foundations out of them. And that I think speaks a little bit to their investment in the place, right? I mean, they knew within a year that this was not going to be what they thought it was going to be, and so either there was a massive push at the beginning, or they just sort of kind of bought into sort of like the sunk cost fallacy and just kept at it, right? Because you've got that banked road that took some work. You got that stone-lined berm, which I don't know what it is, but it took some work. You've got a bunch of pretty good-sized foundations that took considerable work to build. But there were easier ways to do this, right? I mean, down the road at Hannistown, they're just putting log buildings flat on the ground, right? There are easier ways to build a house than to haul a bunch of rocks up a hill and dig a giant hole to then line with those rocks. So there's that part of it. There's also, we get some sense of maybe how they demolished the place, because it does appear that they demolished it as they were leaving. Because the artifacts are 1790 to about 1830 type artifacts. They're not like 1860s artifacts. So it looks like the artifacts that are mixed down in these foundations are from roughly the period of occupation, right? So these things, when they left, they demolished them and kind of pushed them in on themselves, possibly for tax reasons. Because in the 19th century, you're getting taxed based on number of structures, and so they may have been trying to limit their tax burden, like all good Western Pennsylvanians, right? And so that might be part of it. It looks like they pushed them in, but then they left them open, right? Because we do find those little snail shells. There's a couple of spots where you can see where somebody later came and capped them with different dirt, and so they looked like they were just like holes full of rocks for quite some time, and then eventually they got covered, and then eventually they get plowed. Because this was a plowed active field in recent history, right? So we can get some sense of kind of how the place was demolished. And so the other thing I think about this is interesting is, this is again 1790 about 1830, right? So this is like if you watch the musical Hamilton, like this whole second 2/3 is going on like right in this period, right? So there's stuff going on in other parts of the continent, but people out here, this is their spot. So you got the guy Barry, right, who like basically runs his entire career out of this town. And so when we look back at it, it's easy to think about it as sort of a failure, right? Like they basically they picked this spot. It was a bad spot. The road moved, and then all the infrastructure moved around them, and they built so that the grandkids could live there, and probably many of them moved in and moved out within their lifetime, right? And so it's easy to think about it maybe as sort of a failure. But the flip side is that it is an important step in the development of Western Pennsylvania and of Indiana County. It serves as sort of an incubator for a lot of folks that eventually have their careers in Blairsville and Indiana, right? There's a number of blacksmiths, doctors, physicians that either start their career in Newport or are born in Newport that then go on to do other stuff in the 19th century. It's also a toehold for commerce at a period where there wasn't a whole lot else going on in this area, right? So it had to happen so other things could happen, basically. And the other thing I was going to point out too is that the Anglo-Americans who set up at Newport are not the first ones to be there. We do find a smattering of indigenous and Native American artifacts kind of around the area. Probably attracted for the same reasons that the people at Newport were there, right? It's one of the few places where you can get easily down to the Conemaugh in this stretch. It has those springs, and so the things that attracted the Newport residents probably also attracted the earlier indigenous residents, probably many, many, many generations of them. Also the same thing, by the way, that attracted the pipeline folks, right? That low spot seems to pull everybody in. But we also get things like this. So this is we found it in a couple pieces, but it all refit together. But it's a blade made out of what's called Flint Ridge chert. Flint Ridge chert is from Ohio, okay? So this piece of stone came out here through a trade network to this spot, and probably was broken there, or part of a tool that broke there. And so it's come on the opposite direction than most of the stuff coming from Newport, right? Newport's trying to send stuff to Pittsburgh. This is coming from past Pittsburgh this way. But it's the same sort of trade network, right? It's coming by road and by river, by Native American roads and by river transportation to get here, right? And so this spot has a history of transportation, of commerce, of goods moving through it. And there's actually a little spot right down kind of close to the river, right by the pipelines. The pipeline almost destroyed it, where there's a little Native American site that you can see up to the Black Lick and you can see down to the curve, so you got real good visibility. It's one of the few flatter spots, and there's a little hearth there, and we found some tools there. But it's a very short occupation. It's got only about 10 centimeters of dirt and all the artifacts in it. So again, kind of following the same theme. People come to Newport, the place of Newport. They would have called it something different, again and again and again for probably thousands of years. We just have the latest name for it. But nobody stays that long, right? It's all short occupations. And so I think that's, again, there's some of these through lines that run through the place. All right, that's all I got. I appreciate y'all's patience. Thank you. Yes, sir.
The Frenchtown Road came to Nice, and was it constructed with the road that you have on
The Cobble Road, or I think the Cobble Road is a later. It's not the Frankstown Road.
What is the Frenchtown Road that ends at Newport?
So our guess is that it's the thing that's coming down, kind of coming from the east and coming down towards the river. At least one iteration of it would have been. So this
right here says to Frankstown. And so this is and it's labeled as Newport Road, right? This is, again, later map drawn kind of from memory. But this would make the most sense. If the initial purpose of the town was this transshipment, then the Frankstown Road coming in and going right down to the river is probably what the initial intent was.
Did you find any excavations of the Frenchtown Road?
Yeah, so we dug kind of right there, a trench, like about a half meter by about 4 or 5 meter trench across it, trying to pick it up. And that's where we found kind of compacted soils. It's not cobble. It just would have been, been driven over a bunch and kind of compacted down. It doesn't have that kind of banked curve down here, which is gravel and sort of controlled. But this one doesn't have anything on it, which is part of the reason why I think this here, which is marked as the 19th century public road, the cobbling might have happened post-Newport, when this was sort of just a public road going through. Because in my mind, right, you got 1 road, 2 roads, maybe 3 roads here. So this was not a curving road originally, but it was in fact more than 1 road in the town of Newport. But then it gets picked up as Blairsville develops. It gets picked up and becomes part of the road that takes you kind of farther north, kind of running parallel. So I think the cobbling might not have been the Newport folks. It might have been a generation or so afterwards. Speculative. That's my guess. So,
yeah.
The hearts you found, were those archaic at that point?
So a couple of them are late prehistoric, called Madison Point. So 1,000 to 500 years ago. The Fishtail Point is a little bit earlier. There are, I think, one of the broken ones is an earlier, like a late archaic point. This is not my specialty, yeah. So it's kind of a series of things over time. That Flint Ridge blade could in fact be really early if it comes off of a specific type of projectile point. So our thought is that this is a place that people would have come back to. Because again, you could pull your canoe out of the river there, there's springs there. It would have been a good place to pause as you're moving along the river systems of Pennsylvania.
And then a second question. So you mentioned that on the northeast side of that curve, was roughly nothing. Is that because of land ownership? Has land ownership changed there?
It might be. I don't have a good answer. I got a couple of students right here. I kept there's got to be stuff here because you got the so-called Frankstown Road coming in. You got this other road coming across it. That's an intersection, right? So with the exception of the Rite Aid down here, which can't stand a distance, but every other intersection tends to have stuff on all 4 corners. That's a good spot to be. So it kind of boggles my mind that there doesn't seem to be anything on the other corners of that intersection. So yeah, maybe, it might be, other places we do see there's sort of in-town lots and out-of-town lots, and the out-of-town lots are for sort of small-scale farming, and the in-town lots are for residences. And so it might be that just on the other side of that road is the out lots. I just was surprised, but that's why I do this, because if I knew the answer, I wouldn't have to go and do the work. Yes, sir.
Found any nails?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do they seem like they're made by a steam press, or?
They're cut nails. We would expect cut nails, because cut nails come in around 1780, 1790 generally, and it takes a while for them to get certain places. But yeah, most of them are cut. Rather than a hand wrought nail, they're cut nail. So maybe they're doing that. They are bringing, quite a bit of iron is coming through the area across the Frankstown Road from the Juniata district. So it would make some sense to have somebody who's not, taking those that sort of, it's not ore, it's actually processed iron, but knocking that into plates and then cutting the plates to make nails, especially as the area develops, right? Because that's one thing that people, are going to need to build their houses and this kind of thing. So it may have been just kind of cottage industry. I think the thing that trips me out is the factory part of it. I think it's cottage industry, not like, there's not like smokestacks kind of thing. So, yeah,
The field school runs about 5 weeks? Longer, 6 weeks?
yeah, so we do it when
Actually, I'll follow up question on that. How many credits do the kids get?
6 months.
Okay.
So it's, normally we run it six weeks, 5 days a week. That's when I make good life choices. I got backed up against Hillary's birthday this year. And so we're doing it 5 weeks, 6 days a week, which wears everybody out. But it's a 6 credit class.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, how much, from the Newport Road to the 19th Century Road, how much territory is on that side of the Newport Road of the town?
Sorry, from like, you're talking about right here?
Yes.
I don't know. Might be 5 acres in that field, I'm not sure. Maybe it is something. I'm not, I have a hard time, but yeah, I would guess about it.
So there would be like 5 streets from the river.
I don't know, honestly, I really don't. It'd be, sometimes the GPR can see like compacted soil, so one of the questions we had at Hannah's time is also about where some roads ran, and we found one with basically 2 big ruts out in the middle of the field, but buried under the field, right, with the GPR. We're not seeing any of that in here. I don't think there's roads really running this way too much. There may be a road down here. It looks like there's a flat spot that they manufactured by some retaining walls. So maybe a road's coming up and then heading up this way. This is a pretty gnarly. These are turbo lines here. It's a pretty serious hill. You could cut grass on it if you wore proper shoes, kind of hill, right? Like you wouldn't roll sideways, but it was I wouldn't want to run a road across. I think they'll run the roads up top here, and they may be coming in. But if there's other subdivisions, I don't know. I feel like we might be missing a piece of the town, and that's why we keep trying to like feel out from the known to the unknown. But we're running out of spots. The only spot really left, and we haven't really looked, and it's private property, is south of the pipeline, but east of Newport Road. There's some fields over there that we haven't done any testing, and that's the last spot, like moving out from the known, but we haven't looked. So I mean, there may be some stuff out there, but yeah, we're still struggling to get all of the described landscape onto the physical landscape. Yeah.
You know nothing about archaeological digs, but you're using this every couple of years or so with the students. So what happens to the holes in between those years?
We fill them in.
You do?
Part of our from both the federal government and the state government. One of the stipulations is we return the topography to where it was when we started. And so everything gets filled in. The last couple of days are putting the rocks back in, putting the dirt back in, kind of packing it down, that kind of stuff. If we think we're going to come back to a spot, we will put some tarp or something into the hole. So in these areas we're digging now, there is some tarp down in the old holes, which is partly there to help me line it back up again. If I can find the tarp on the surface, I can get us lined back up a little bit. I was only marginally successful in that this year. And then also, in theory, we could pull it back out again. If we really wanted to see everything, we could dig down to the tarp and pull it back out again. So it gives us a little bit of flexibility that way. But yeah, we basically put it back so that in this case, when the hunters come and use it, it doesn't look like anybody did anything. So that's what we do. It's also a little bit to protect it, because if we leave them wide open, it's a signal to anybody who might want to come and do some less scientific excavation there, that this is the spot to go to. So yeah, everything gets filled back in.
It reminds me of a movie, I think probably from about 30 years ago or something, called Holes, I believe. And I don't remember why it was that they had like all these teenage kids out there digging holes. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhere between Holes and like Cool Hand Luke.
When we did the cross cut of the road, how much new sediment was on top of it once active?
That's a good question. Of the cobbled one, not a huge amount, like probably like 10, 20 centimeters before we hit rock. And pretty close on the other one. The other one had it's a little bit harder to tell because you're just looking at that. You couldn't even see it, you could just feel it with the instrument. But yeah, probably about 20 centimeters, so whatever that is. Yeah, John.
What is one piece of technology that's out there for archaeological digs that would sort of potentially open up, answering a lot of your questions that would be nice to have and use?
Yeah, I mean, so the ground penetrating radar is really nice. Like, it is good. It does give you a lot of kind of blurry things. You have to go dig at them. I mean, if this was threatened, like if there was like, it's threatened by people like kind of picking at it. But if it was a lot of the archaeology I used to do before I became a professor, the archaeology I trained students to do is what we call cultural resource management. And that is essentially about 90-some-odd% of the archaeology in the United States. It happens when there is a threat to an archaeological site. So the federal government is either doing something or paying for something or providing a permit for something that is going to destroy an archaeological site. And so the archaeologists then go out and they find it, and then they excavate enough to record it. And that gives you a different mindset, because basically this is going to be here. Like, I'm the most threatening thing to this site, right? We're digging it, we do some damage to it, but because we can't put things back exactly like they were, and so we are the threat on this one. But like, let's say they were going to expand Newport Road, right? Somehow that becomes going to become an interstate highway, and this is just going to get blown away. It changes your perspective, because you're like, well, I mean, we might as well go all in on this, because it's not, we're going to get as much information as we can before it's totally destroyed. If that was the case, I would take a backhoe and just strip all the topsoil off. Because that way I can see all the foundations, I can see all the artifact deposits, I can see all the small features that maybe our test pits jumped over. And so that would be the sort of nuclear option in this one. But because again, if we don't want to do that, we can always come back and ask different questions. In the future, someone who's smarter than me or has better technology can come back and ask different questions. And so we're probably, at this point, this is probably our last season of this one, and we'll move on to something different. But yeah, I think that the simple answer is a backhoe. Everything else we can kind of access, like LiDAR to get sort of the topography and those kind of things. Chris Shaney, Dr. Shaney from IUP is going to come out and do a drone survey for us, and we'll get some good LiDAR data from that. So these various things that when I started my career, we didn't have any access to. The photogrammetry, the LiDAR, ground penetrating was around, but it wasn't heavily used. Helps us really do this much better and be much more confident in what we're seeing, and that we're not missing huge chunks of the site that are really important. Yes.
Quick question.
Sure, right back to you. Just go ahead, ma'am. Go ahead.
Oh, is it gated off or roped off so that people don't go in when you guys aren't there?
I mean, we're there 6 days a week, so it helps. But no, we cover our units every night, and they've got tarps and stuff on them. But we don't put up like hurricane fence or anything like that. In part because that just makes it more attractive, right? It looks more important that way. As it is, when we leave, unless you know where we were, you wouldn't really notice anything. Right? There's just like some brown or black tarps on the field out there, so you wouldn't know that something's going on. And so yeah, we kind of depend on people's goodwill and also a little bit of invisibility when we're doing it.
So you don't have like any vandalism that's going on while you're in the evenings?
I mean, no, not yet. So I mean, we lock our stuff up and that kind of thing, but no, we have never had. I mean, yeah, generally people are pretty kind. So, yes.
When you talk about a cobble road, what was that constructed of, and was it just in the town proper, or did it extend out to other areas?
So so the cobbles are. So that top image gives you some sense of it. So they're not like a cobble, like a uniform cobble, like you might think of, or even like a dressed cobble. It's mostly just like hand-sized rocks that were sort of laid on top.
It was
So that,
stone.
what's that?
It was stone, it wasn't, I've seen some places where they take wood, they take logs and set them in on an end.
Yeah, those are cool.
It was stone.
Yeah. No, it's just stone. And so you can kind of see up there, we kind of dug into some places up top there, so it's not as uniform as it was when we found it, but yeah, just stone, sort of these river rocks sort of laid across the top right on top of the subsoil. So they kind of dug down, formed it, and then laid rock on top. I don't know how far it goes. We dug one trench across it, and that was it. I would wager that it probably goes all the way from.
We dug right here, and I would wager that it goes all the way up here as cobble because nobody plowed that. I think that's why there's a weird shaped field, is because it was full of rocks and nobody wanted to plow that. And so I would wager this whole enterprise is cobble. You can see how this would have traditionally gone down, kind of past the gas pipeline here, and then eventually met up with what is today the modern road. How much of it was cobbled, I really don't know. But I would guess a pretty sizable chunk of it was. We didn't find any cobbles up on this side up here, but we didn't look real hard for them either, to be honest.
Other questions from folks?
Thank you very much.
All right, folks, I hope everyone enjoyed the talk. If you really liked it, please join us again in October, or check out the Tourist Bureau's website for the other 1776 speaker series talks. Our program committee has prepared ice cream tonight, so there are some refreshments back here, and you're all welcome to join us. Otherwise, please keep an eye on our calendar of events, and we hope to see you again. Thank you for joining us, and have a good night.